of reaching results pretty fast. And finally, if democracies want to be, to be considered as very legitimate and successful, they need to be able to prove they solve problems. If democracy is just legitimate but don't solve problems, then we have a huge problem.
But Belgium, when I lived there a while back, it was always almost the most federalist country in the European Union, the one that was always saying, Europe's got to do more on its own. Do you think the vision of the challenge from Trump means that Europe is going to really have to get its act together in the way that maybe the Belgians have been arguing for a long time?
But that has been going on for the past years. I mean, we didn't need Trump to know that as Europeans we need to stand on our own legs. We can't be dependent on other parts of the world for our security. We can't be dependent on other parts of the world for semiconductors or for energy. I think that process has been going on for some time. Now, on the fact that you have a new president, what we have to do is be careful to not every day be in a reactive mode. And it's quite easy to do so. I can imagine that every day there is something coming from Washington that we feel that we should react on. I don't think we should, because that puts us in a reactive mode, and that's not the position we as Europeans want to be. Though I think that sometimes we do have to react. For example, if Turkey, which is also a NATO ally, would talk about the Greek islands the way the United States have talked about Greenland, I think we would all be furious. So I think that on certain occasions we have to be clear and say, look, this is unacceptable, and this is a red line. I think beyond all the statements and all the communication, maybe you also need to look at some of the concerns of the United States, and some of those concerns, I think, are legitimate concerns. The United States have had a trade deficit for years now with Europe. That is an issue. I think we should address it. And I think we should find moments where you find things that make economic sense and that also make geopolitical sense. We want to detach from Russian gas. We should do it faster than what we're doing today. Well, maybe one of the options is just buy more LNG in the United States. It would help on the trade deficit from a geopolitical point of view. It makes sense. I could imagine that in semiconductors, we can match geopolitics and economics, and you can do that in defense spending as well. That, I think, is the real work. It's not reacting on the tweets and the statements and so on, but some of the concerns of the United States, I think we need to acknowledge that they are legitimate concerns, just as we Europeans also, I think, have legitimate concerns which we should communicate.
Interesting. Okay, well, there are loads more issues. I'd love to come up with talk a bit more about the sabotage, which General Cavalli mentioned, but I would also like to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. So, anybody want to stick their hand up? Yeah, just in front of me there. If you could say who you are, that's always helpful. And
thank you very much. I'm a journalist from Chinese media, Caixin, and I'm wondering that it seems that the Donald Trump administration has already shown some inclination to invite China into the potential negotiation process for Ukraine. So what will be yours, the European leaders, your candidate suggestion towards Chinese side when regarding China's role in the following up process, especially when it comes to Europe want to contribute to a fair, just, and reliable
Who wants to take that one? I won't ask all five of you to comment all around.
Okay. Well, I think there are three key principles when we're dealing with any kind of a settlement on Ukraine. The first one is independence, the second one is sovereignty, and the third one is territorial integrity. In my mind, Ukraine must retain and maintain its independence. In my mind, Ukraine must retain its sovereignty. In other words, it has to have the right to choose whether it wants to join NATO and or the European Union. And of course, the territorial integrity is a key element of international law. I don't think there should be peace in Ukraine without Ukraine. I don't think there should be peace in Ukraine without Europe. There might be a transaction at the end of the day.
And can China play a role, though? I mean, do you trust the Chinese? Because some people think they're so close to Russia.
In October, I had the privilege of spending 3.5 hours with President Xi Jinping in Beijing on a state visit. And of course, our agenda was mainly focused on Ukraine and Russia. And my plea to him was, because he's in such a strong position with Russia right now, that if he wants to be a peacemaker, he can influence Putin. But that, of course, does not mean that the final peace settlement will be a Chinese or a Russian peace settlement. We'll see what President Trump and General Kellogg come up with. I think 24 hours has become 3 to 6 months. I think that's the window of opportunity where we see things happening. I also have the privilege of having a one-on-one with President Zelensky tonight, so I'm sure I'll be wiser after that.
Okay.
But of course, as long, I mean, I agree with that, but as long as China is so obviously enabling Russia's war against Ukraine, it's hard to see any kind of fast ways for including them right now. Nobody would be happier than me if China could become a constructive part of that peace, but you know, at least it has to start with not enabling the war.
Yeah.
Impacts on Russia is the key.
Right, okay. There's a bunch of people behind me. Does anybody want to ask a question in this section of the room? No, I think we're okay here. Yeah, over there.
Hi, I'm from the Philippines. I just wanted to ask, less from the perspective of China towards Ukraine and Russia, but do you think there are any parallels from your discussion tonight with regards to what's happening in Asia Pacific and also all over the planet? And just wondering if you think that there's any, I guess, universal lessons or values or anything that could be drawn that we should be
General, do you want to take that
one?
Yeah, sure. I think the universal lessons, you know, go to what President Stubb talked about a minute ago. Independence, territorial integrity, sovereignty, the interconnection of all those things. Those are just fundamental to international relations and responsible behavior among states. So if we start from that, there are plenty of lessons to be learned from this conflict, and there are plenty of echoes that we see in other parts of the world. You know, some of them are very obvious, some of them are a little bit more subtle. I think what is very much a transportable lesson from this conflict is the importance of military strength, to go to the name of your panel, Gideon, the importance of military strength to maintaining peace and to reestablishing peace when peace fails. I think that's fundamental. I think you hear that in the words of everybody around this roundtable this evening, and I think it's a realization that we've come back to as a collection of democracies recently as a result of this war.
Okay. Now, an issue that's come up a little bit is this sabotage campaign in the Baltic Sea. I'd be interested, you know, we've got several people who have an interest in that. Actually, General, sorry, again, what's happening as far as you know?
Sure. The Russians and before them the Soviet state have a long history of using what they called active measures to destabilize potential adversaries. And I believe that's what we see going on. This is a destabilization campaign. It's intended to intimidate the nations that are the subjects of it. It is intended to affect our decision-making, and it's necessary to protect ourselves against it and stand up to it, which is exactly what individual nations are doing. Here I very much salute Sweden and Finland for their actions over the last year in this regard, and it's necessary for us to stand up collectively as well. NATO has done exactly that. As you know, we've stood up a special operation in the Baltic Sea in the last couple of days. We did it on just a couple of days' notice in order to protect allies from this sort of behavior and to work with sovereign nations, members of the alliance, as they apply their own legal authorities to the problems that are.
So what specifically is that force in the Baltic Sea doing?
Well, it's making sure we know everything that's going on the sea and in the sea and above the sea in the Baltic, and then directing the relevant information to the competent authorities. As you know, in these questions, it's a very complicated jurisdiction. Some of it's commercial property, some of it's state property, some of it's taking place inside national boundaries, some of it's taking place in international boundaries. So the key thing we can do is pass the relevant information to the correct authority, or if we are required to take action ourselves.
President Stubb, I mean, our undersea cables, is that basically what we're talking about, and the threat that communications cables are going to be cut?
Yeah, I mean, we have a very vast critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. Some of it's data cables, other energy cables can be gas or electricity. And, Ulf and I experienced in the past year 3 incidents. In the first particular case, about a year plus ago, it was a Chinese ship that dragged its anchor and tore a couple of cables. Then about a month and a half ago, there was one in close to Swedish territorial waters. And we were able to board that ship, but not take it on board. And then the final case happened on the 25th of December, very close to Finnish territorial waters. And we put in front an operation, which then later on became, I guess, called the Finnish model. And the key here is that the private sector, in other words, the provider of the cable, informs the authorities. And this happened within about an hour, hour and a half. After that hour, authorities located the 2 possible ships that could have been the case, identified one, took one of our military or coastline ships close to it and helicopters to hover over, saw that the anchor was down, stopped the ship, and ordered it to move to Finnish territorial waters for investigation. And everything worked out really well. It was pretty much a 24, 48-hour operation. And the key authorities there are the border, the customs, police, and the Navy. And we were able to contain it. And that's why we then decided, together with Estonia, Sweden, and the other Baltic Sea states, to have a summit meeting on the 14th of December, together, of course, with NATO, led by the Secretary General, where we announced the Baltic Sentry operation of NATO, where we announced action on critical infrastructure, and where we announced action on taking care of the shadow fleet. So in many ways, I think, successful operation, well, not on the ground, but in the sea, and then also hopefully strategically communicating very clearly to Russia and others that don't do this again.
There is a discussion going on right now, not least in intelligence kind of circles. Can you prove it's intentional? That's a legitimate question. And normally, it's very hard to prove things being intentional. On the other hand, you can say, we don't believe in, that randomly things just starting to happen. Vessels suddenly starting to drag their anchor for tens of kilometers, and so when things start happening that are very unlikely, they might not be so unlikely. So you need to take this very seriously. We don't easily throw out accusations, of course, as governments, but we do take it very seriously. And the potential damage is equally big, regardless whether it is intentional or, as they put it, very bad seamanship. Yeah. Because if cables and electricity is being cut off, it has really serious consequences.
And are there also risks that you actually might have fatalities from some of this? Because another thing that people have pointed to is these bombs that have been put on.
I'm more worried about an environmental catastrophe. I mean, the reason we need to contain and control the shadow fleet is that a lot of the ships are very old, kind of run down, and they have masses of oil. So we're really worried about our Baltic Sea, that something might be happening there. And I think it's in the interest of all of us around the Baltic Sea, including Russia, that it doesn't get contaminated. But now we come to the question earlier from the Philippines, freedom of navigation. So one of the things that we decided also to do is to look at the different measures in which we can prevent these types of events from happening without violating international law. It's a complicated matter.
So let me just finish, because we've only got about 4 minutes left, by talking specifically about the situation in Ukraine. It looks from reports that Russia has been advancing slowly. How do you see the war evolving over the next year, General? I mean, are you worried that Ukraine could lose quite rapidly?
No, I'm not worried that Ukraine could suddenly lose. I don't see the potential for a massive breakdown or massive breakthrough. And that's not a political, that's a military judgment. And it's got to do with both sides, the effective defenses that the Ukrainians have been putting in, but also the difficulty that the Russian side has in generating significant offensive forces to be able to exploit a potential breakthrough. So I think we'll see a lot more of the same sort of incremental advances we've seen. They are exhausting for Russia. I mean, there's a reason Russia brought thousands and thousands of soldiers from North Korea in to help fight. It's because Russia also is having manpower problems. So I think we'll continue to see this tension between a desire to advance and the shortage of manpower on the Russian side. I think that will define much of the conflict, and it will push the Russians to use a lot more standoff weapons, as you've seen them increasingly do over the past years. Destructive weapons, but rarely decisive weapons in terms of overturning a government or imposing a complete defeat.
But if this is the last big package of USA, the last one was passed, if no more comes through, does that change the situation?
Well, first of all, I think, that's a hypothetical that we've got to be careful with. But secondly, I would call attention to the very significant uplift in European aid that's been sent, especially in terms of munitions. There has been a significant increase in the output of artillery shells and rockets from our European allies who have been contributing in huge numbers to Ukraine. And I expect to see that continue, and I expect to see it increase as well.
Okay, so from the European leaders here, if America pulls back even a little bit, is Europe capable of filling the gap and keeping Ukraine in the fight?
Maybe let's take a step back. What would be the advantage for Mr. Trump to pull back? Exactly. Would it be to say, Mr. Putin, you were right and you won? I find that a very hard argument for him. So, and you say that there's a military judgment. The military judgment is linked to political judgment. That is a core political judgment. There's none of the European countries that want to say, Mr. Putin, go ahead, you did this with Ukraine. Now you wait 2-3 years to replenish yourself, and then you have a go at another European country. There's no European country that would agree to it. And I have a hard time to believe that that would be a strategic objective of the United States.
But there are two short answers. One is, yes, we can do more. We can do more as Europeans. And our strongest argument to the US to make them stay committed is for the Europeans to be role models. That's the only way for us to really be trustworthy when we ask the Americans also, American taxpayers, please stay committed to what's happening in Ukraine.
President?
Fully agree. Look at it from Putin's perspective. This was supposed to be over in 3 days. We're into it for 3 years. He was supposed to make Ukraine Russian. It's European. He was supposed to keep NATO at bay, stronger than ever. He was not supposed to get NATO on his border, just doubled the border of NATO through Finland and later on with Sweden. So we'll just have to keep at it.
And from Belarus, are you confident that in the end Putin is going to lose, or do you think he could win?
You are talking so much about weapon, physical weapon, but I have to say that a weapon is senseless without brave people. So let's think first of all about investment to people. Because I'm here just in a little bit different position, because I'm a nation that needs support, and your country is providing support. And I believe how it's important not to lose trust into your allies, not to get this feeling of being betrayed at the moment, because when you have this, sense that you are abandoned, you are forgotten, that countries don't pay attention, to you or not keep you in focus, it's really demoralize people, and they lose trust into democracy, and it's very important. They lose trust in neighbors, and it's not only about Belarus or Ukraine. It's about members of European Union as well, because now I live in Lithuania. It's a wonderful country, very brave, principled, but when I'm talking to Lithuanians, they're also not sure, just in the case Russia will come to Lithuania, that NATO alliance will come and protect them. So because they see that, assistance to Ukraine, is decreasing, so not so much attention, so they really want to, I want you to keep trust in each other. This is important. You might have, dozens of tanks and helicopters and so on and so forth, but if people don't believe in your capability, to support each other and come and rescue your ally, so everything is senseless. So contribute, invest into people.
Thank you. That's a very good note to end on. So thank you to the entire panel and to the audience. And that's it for now.
Thank you.
Thanks.